cases, say thank you or hello or up with Bush and down with Saddam. We've heard that too. In answer to the question from Rita about the looting, on our trip here, we saw ridiculous amounts of looting going on. Not necessarily the grabbing of the stuff itself, but the moving of the stuff down the highway. Anything that people could carry or push or pull or roll or ride, they were doing it. I actually saw not one but two different groups of Iraqis with motorcycle sidecars, bright red, loaded with stuff that they were pushing down the street. We also saw a number of very large 18-wheeler, the trucks, not the trailer, but the truck itself, being driven down the road. You could tell they were brand new, and in one case, it wasn't being driven, it was actually being pushed by a group of men, pushing an 18-wheeler truck down the road. A lot of bobcats, it's just like a small construction piece of equipment with a little, what do you call that, a front-end loader thing on the front of it, with generators, brand new generators. We did one after another, piled with stuff. In some cases, there would be 3 or 4 guys riding on the back of it, but they were breaking into places and stealing the Bobcats. We're hearing that it's happening in the city itself. I haven't personally seen it, but we did see 2 vehicles with big UN letters on the side drive by earlier today, and as far as we know, the UN pulled out of here a while ago. I could be wrong on that, but I'm pretty sure that there's no UN staff left here, which suggests to me that either they gave their vehicles to somebody or somebody is helping themselves to their vehicles.
And Rick, I think I can answer that because there's something that's crossing the wires that they're looting the UN headquarters there in Baghdad. So I think someone did take a freebie there. I want to ask you about
well, we had heard that might happen.
What about people fleeing too, Rick? Because
we had heard that.
Go ahead.
Fleeing? People fleeing?
People.
I'm asking them now. You mean like people running?
No, people like refugees. You talk about a lot of people loading up stuff. Are people leaving, though?
Yeah, people.
You seen that, Sergeant Brutt? Because I haven't personally seen that. I mean, I have seen people drive by, but mostly they were in pickup trucks that were loaded down with like chairs and filing cabinets and ceiling fans and stuff, anything they could carry that they were taking from like Republican Guard headquarters and that sort of thing. But you've seen people actually trying to get out of the city?
I came in personally a little bit later after the unit, and I saw people trying to get across the bridges and get out of the city and at least walk to the outer areas.
Do you get the sense that people are anxious to get out, or you get the sense that people are anxious for you guys to just ensure that they can stay?
I think they're just getting out for their family safety or whatever and getting out of the area eventually to come back in. At one of the places we stayed outside of Baghdad, there was a whole family there that lives in Baghdad, and the place that we had set up camp had a family there that was, they had just relocated before we came in just to make sure everybody was okay. They had their motorhome set up and everything. And
there are reports, Sergeant, that there are actually crowds of people cheering for the Marines in different parts of Baghdad as they pass through. I see Corman nodding his head. You guys have seen that, felt that? And
when I was at the tail end with the Humvee, and as I went by, they were whistling. I'm like, yeah, they seem pretty happy to have us here.
And I guess that would validate for you your purpose.
Yep. You know what? Whatever we got to do to make them have a better place to live and help them out. So if this makes their lives better, then it's totally worth it.
Okay, excellent point. Thanks, Sergeant. One other point about the looting, not to belabor it or anything, but there are a lot of police officers in this battalion. It's a reservist battalion, and there are at least 17 guys with the LAPD, and there are other police officers from Beverly Hills and Las Vegas and Salt Lake and other cities, but they're not out here looking to arrest anybody, and they're not out here to enforce the local laws. So unless there's a real need to do it, they're not going to stop the looting, but they certainly don't want to see a complete loss of authority or control here in Baghdad.
And Rick, give us a sense of some of the other people in the unit. I mean, we just heard from this guy, worked in a restaurant. I remember you talking earlier, someone did data control, someone worked at General Mills, another guy worked at Sears. I just think this is incredible, these guys dedicating themselves to service.
You're a reservist?
That's correct.
What do you do when you're not a Marine and fighting the war in Iraq?
I'm a supervisor with UPS.
UPS?
Mm-hmm.
And where do you live?
I lived in Burbank before we came here.
Okay, you want to give us your full name and say hi to anybody?
It's Jason Sherlock. Hi to my family and to Erica. I love you all, and I can't wait to get home.
You're a long way from UPS, a long way from taking care of people's packages.
That is true. It's something, obviously, that I volunteered for, and to come out here and do our job is, the ultimate test of our skills, and the fact that we're able to come out here and help a people is definitely makes it worthwhile, even though it's very difficult.
But do you ever wake up and say, what the heck am I doing here?
Well, of course. I mean, to subject yourself to this type of an environment is not a natural thing. So, your first instinct always is, why am I doing this? But, we all have a job to do, and, we're doing what we can.
And we all appreciate it. I can speak for myself, and I know everybody back home does too. Can you come over this way? We got not a lot of cable here. Give us your full name and...
My name's Corporal Nick Kakis.
Nick, and where are you from?
Burlingame, California.
And what do you do when you're not over here fighting a good fight?
I'm a student, and I was right out of high school, so I didn't start yet, but eventually.
You're looking forward to going to college when you get home?
Looking forward to it.
Mm-hmm. And is this where you wanted to be?
I didn't picture myself here joining as a reservist in boot camp. You don't picture yourself here, but I'm glad I can be here. I mean, just looking at these people, regardless of what people say back home, if we belong here or not, just looking at these people cheer for us and being here, I'm glad we can do this. I mean, I'd like to go home, but...
Okay, it sounds like we're going to have to move. I guess we're moving positions out here, guys, so we can probably set up again in another location, but for now we're going to have to say good night or good morning or good afternoon.
All right, Rick, be safe, and we'll talk to you soon. And I'm sure that UPS route's going to be a little dull after this. Thank you very much.
Well, let's talk about what's happening right now in Baghdad, because it is crumbling from the stranglehold of Saddam Hussein over the last 2 decades. How do we know it? Roll the videotape. We just got this in. There is widespread looting and cheering crowds, both. Now, let me talk about the looting first, because looters are attacking a number of major sites in Baghdad, including the UN headquarters and the Olympic Committee building, believe it or not, and they are driving away with all sorts of things, including vehicles that are being taken. Reuters television crews are watching cheering crowds sack the UN headquarters. Another eyewitness saw looters raiding sports shops around the bombed Iraqi Olympic Committee. One Reuters correspondent said authority appears to have broken down in the capital as American troops are moving in. He could see no police in the main central thoroughfares. Now, the other thing we're seeing is jubilation. Hundreds of jubilant Iraqis mobbing convoys of American Marines, cheering and dancing and waving as American troops are sweeping in toward the central part of Baghdad. They're driving through the slums and the leafy, nicer suburbs as well. A Reuters correspondent said crowds are throwing flowers at the Marines as they drive past the Martyrs Monument, which is really just 3 kilometers, 2 miles east of central Baghdad along the Tigris River. You're seeing some of the looting here as well, but the scenes are described by those there as truly extraordinary. The crowds who are cheering the troops are mainly young Middle Eastern men. No more Saddam Hussein, chanted one group. Another young man ran alongside a Marine armored personnel carrier trying to hand over a heavy belt of ammunition. Another man sort of made a wild kicking gesture with his foot saying, "Goodbye, Saddam." In the meantime, others taking advantage of the lawlessness in the town. Look at these pictures here as they just cart things away in some of their old, we saw a Toyota truck there a moment ago, trying to get their hands on many things. I suppose a function of 2 things. One, there's no authority in Baghdad anymore, at least in some sections of Baghdad. And second of all, as Van Hipp had pointed out, these are people who have been so long suppressed physically and economically and psychologically. And in terms of economics, they're just trying to take advantage of the situation, Rita.
Yeah, this is just a moment of freedom and a moment to be able to express that. I remember when I was in Kosovo, we saw the same thing in Pristina, tons of looting. And then as Van Hipp mentioned too, they sort of amongst themselves find a sense of order, and that's probably what's going to happen here. The Iraqis will sort of take some order themselves after all this sort of gets out of their system. And just amazing, though, to see the pictures of the toppled statues there and people cheering. And what a great sign, too, to see them cheering our troops on and saying freedom and cheering to the stands. Look at that flag.
Yeah.
Honking.
One recalls that it was just 3 or 4 months ago that there was a faux election in Iraq, in which the next day Saddam Hussein claimed to have received 100% of the vote, not one dissent.
Of course, he was the only one on the ballot. But just amazing, wonderful scenes there. But unfortunately, you know, as we're looking at this thing, there's still a lot of areas to clean up. And although we have 100% air supremacy, according to the Pentagon, there are still some issues that they're looking into. In fact, Central Command is investigating the crash of an F-15E fighter jet. Rescue teams are out searching for the crew, and there's a lot of questions as to maybe what caused that, caused the loss of that vehicle, the loss of that aircraft, rather. And of course, we're looking for the men inside. Fox News correspondent David Lee Miller is joining us live from U.S. Central Command in Doha, Qatar, for that and also the latest. David.
Good morning, Rita. As Iraqis celebrate the demise of this regime and Saddam Hussein, there is still a great deal of uncertainty about the whereabouts of the former Iraqi leader. It increasingly appears. And joining me right now is Captain Frank Thorpe here at CENTCOM to discuss the latest regarding Saddam as well as what is happening on the ground in Iraq. Firstly, what, if anything, can you tell us about the whereabouts of Saddam Hussein and whether or not that airstrike was successful the other day?
We don't yet have any firm reports about the results of the strike on the command and control meeting that was thought to be taking place at the time. We'll continue to collect information, but I really have to say our focus is not about that one person. This is about bringing down the whole regime. All the leaders of this regime must come to an end. So as we focus on the future, the objective, the real objective here is to end the regime and free and liberate the Iraqi people.
That said, what is the difficulty that is now being encountered in confirming the results of that airstrike? We have troops on the ground in Baghdad. Have they been able to go over to this site and examine it themselves? And what type of intelligence reports are you getting? And I ask you to be mindful of the fact that there are reports this morning coming out of London. At least 3 newspapers quote unnamed British intelligence sources saying the missile attack did not get Saddam.
I think there's a lot of speculation by many people outside the military. We continue to collect military reports, and we'll continue to provide information about those.
Can you get to the site?
The city's a big city. We do not have people on the ground right there in that area. We do have people several miles away from the site of that attack, and members of the 5th Corps, and they are continuing to solidify their position. Overnight they were resupplied, continuing to be resupplied, and they will continue to move out and continued armor raids there west of the Tigris River.
A potential stronghold is Tikrit, Saddam's hometown. There are some reports suggesting he may in fact be in Tikrit in some type of underground bunker. Can you tell me what is now happening in Tikrit? Are there airstrikes? Are there troops advancing towards it?
First, let me focus on the fact that why we would be in Tikrit. This isn't about one person. I just really want to drive that home. Tikrit is a significant city that contains command and control for the regime. Leadership is there. We know it to be there. It's a major city, much like Basra, as several other cities in Iraq. Over the last couple of days, airstrikes have been attacking Iraqi military forces there in Tikrit, and that will continue to do so. As well, we have forces on the ground that are preventing any movement between the city of Baghdad and to the north in Tikrit.
A Air Force F-15E was down near Tikrit, I believe on Sunday. Mm-hmm. Can you tell us what caused that plane to be downed and the fate of its crew?
We're still looking into what brought down the F-15, whether it was shot down by hostile fire or mechanical malfunction. The search and rescue is underway for the F-15 crew. As you know, we normally don't confirm when we have an aircraft down until the search and rescue is completed. This being a little different in that it has been reported around the world that it went down. We're not confirming any area where it went down since the search and rescue is underway, and we're going to great lengths to try to recover the crew of that aircraft.
And very quickly, Captain, can you tell us anything about this rescue that's now being reported? 2 special ops were airlifted from Baghdad. What happened to these men, and where are they now?
An incredible story. 2 soldiers, Special Operations Forces, Army soldiers, critically wounded south of Baghdad in a hostile zone. A rescue was called in. 2 helicopters came in to pull them out. A-10s that were already in the area were called over to provide air cover. A C-130 called in to provide fuel support. Helicopter went in, pulled out the 2 critically wounded soldiers, got them out of the hostile fire zone, removed them to a safer area where the helicopters touched down. A medically capable C-130 came in, landed. Flight surgeon on board the C-130 was able to evacuate the 2 soldiers. The flight surgeon on board the C-130 was treating them as they went down into Kuwait, and the 2 soldiers are now in a medical facility there in Kuwait. And reports we're getting is their chance of survival is great because of the heroism of those flight crews that risked their lives to go in and get their fellow soldiers.
Is the battle over yet in Baghdad?
I wouldn't say that. There very well may be some fierce days to follow. The objective here is the end of the regime. It doesn't focus on Baghdad or Tikrit or Basra or anything like that. The main effort here is to remove this cloud of fear and horror and terrorism from the lives of the Iraqi people, to liberate their country and give their country back to them. So it's a little premature to say anything's over. We still have days, at least days if not weeks, to follow in this battle.
Captain Frank Thorpe, thanks as always, spokesman for CENTCOM here in Doha. And regarding the rescue guys of those 2 special operations soldiers, they were critically injured when they were airlifted out, and it's always great to have some good news to report. And we're now getting word here at CENTCOM that their chance of survival is now, they say, 95%.
All right,
That's the latest
David.
from Doha. We'll see you later this morning for the briefing. Back to you.
Thank you. That is terrific news, David. Thank you very much. We appreciate it. And as we just heard from David Lee Miller and Captain Thorpe there, obviously still some areas very volatile. And still the Battle of Baghdad not over. We're also hearing a U.S. military spokesperson saying it's premature to talk that way. Captain Thorpe was reinforcing that. And to talk about sort of where the volatility still remains, let's bring in Fox News military analyst, Lieutenant Colonel Robert McGinnis. Colonel McGinnis, you know, we seem optimistic. We've made some incredible strides, but we do still have to worry about these pockets of resistance.
Well, clearly, Rita, there are pockets of resistance all over the city. You know, as we were listening to Rick, and let me go to the screenwriter for a second. As we were listening to Rick, there's a recent report out that in Saddam City, which is in the northeast section, that apparently 6 Marines were wounded from RPG and machine gun fire as they were trying to flush out people. Now, as we know, down in this area, the Rashid Air Base is occupied by the 1st Marine Expeditionary Force. And of course, we have Baghdad Airport. We have the area right in the middle where we have at least 2 brigades of the 3rd Infantry Division, and we clearly have forces all around the perimeter establishing what we call a loose cordon, allowing the civilians to exit, but at the same time trying to stop the bad guys from getting out. So the battle is evolving. There doesn't appear to be any organized resistance except in very small pockets of Fedayeen and Al-Qud and perhaps Special Republican Guard. But, you know, this is going to take a while. You know, it's not as if we are in every neighborhood, as we heard a few minutes ago. The Mansour area, where we had the bombing yesterday, and those 4 2,000-pound joint attack direct munitions went in, and we haven't been able to exploit that to find the DNA, which is going to take days to process. So there are a host of things. But I would like to, for a second, Rita, go back and, you know, kind of bring us up to date on something that's going on in the north. I just received a report that along the Green Line in the north, as we know that Mosul is here and Kirkuk is here. Up in this region, there is a mountain called Maglaub Mountain that apparently Kurdish and U.S. forces now control, just 9 miles north of Mosul. And that's significant. We've had firefights, you know, with special forces over to the west. And of course, we heard from Captain Thorpe about Tikrit, which is down here. What's significant as well is that you have, of course, you have the 5th Corps of the Iraqi forces still in Mosul. You have the 1st Corps with 6 divisions still in Kirkuk, and then you have forces in Tikrit. And so with that reality, also keep in mind that our forces are rather thin up there. We have an airfield, Harir Airfield with a 173rd. We have some infantry up there. We have an armor unit up there. But it's rather thin when you compare that, of course, with the forces arrayed against it. So we're going to take care of Baghdad, and then we're going to begin to move up, perhaps with the 4th Infantry Division that has been arriving over the last few days. It will take them a good few days to get into Baghdad and then to begin to punch up north. I would mention, though, that resistance even down in the south, down here in Basra, and especially at the Al-Fa Peninsula, we find still some organized resistance against the Brits, and significant because you have marshy, high grassy areas. They're trying to, interdict our naval operations down there. And even in the port of Qasr, you've had continuing sniping at the British and U.S. operations. So wherever we are in the country, we still have this low-level, almost guerrilla-type, but still organized activity. The North is going to evolve once we take Baghdad, and that appears as if only it's a couple of days away. And as a last note, I would mention that the Iraqis that I speak with, and I've done this for a long time, the Iraqi exile community said that when American boots were heard in the palaces of Saddam, Saddam would be out of the city. And in fact, he would be in the north, perhaps in Tikrit or even in Mosul. So I don't dismiss that at this point. I don't know that we hopefully got him yesterday, but the reality is we may never know.
Yeah, and it's going to be tough. And in fact, the Guardian newspaper, the British newspaper, Colonel, is saying that MI6, which is, of course, that sort of elite intelligence unit there in Britain, sort of similar to our CIA, is saying that it believes Saddam is alive. So a lot of CIA people I talk to say the only way we may know is if we see him on TV again. And of course, we don't know if those are dated, what the possibility is, but still a lot of unanswered questions. All right, Greg.
All right, Colonel, thanks very much. Let's open up this conversation now by rejoining Brad Baker, who's a former Army Ranger, and Colonel John Garrett, who is a retired Marine Corps colonel. Gentlemen, good to see you once again. Brad, let me begin with you because, look, special operations units have been instrumental, not just in Baghdad, but elsewhere. You're a former Army Ranger. Talk to us about that.
Well, they have been instrumental, and I think that I just sort of wanted at 4:45 in the morning Eastern time to sort of blow the horn for them because nobody else is going to. This has sort of come up on the radar screen, and you're going to see it dive back down, and you're not going to hear anything else about it. But you just had an incredible operation just happen, one that is right up there with recovering the POW a few days ago. You actually had a firefight in which Army Special Operations soldiers, 2 of them were injured critically. And then in a matter of moments, you saw how quickly our Special Operation Forces can react, and they brought in medevac, they brought in support helicopters, support gunships, A-10s, the C-130 aircraft they were talking about, which is specially modified. They had a flight surgeon come in, who trains and works with these people all the time, and they were able to get these 2 special operations soldiers out. This is just another testimony to the special operations world and how well trained and how professional they are. And I guarantee you that come tomorrow, nobody in the special ops world will talk about it until they get back to the States and somebody owes somebody a beer for getting them out of there.
Yeah, no kidding. What other kinds of things are special ops likely doing right about now?
Well, I think right about now they have a couple different missions. Obviously, they're trying to gather sensitive intelligence. I believe that they're working, we had discussed last night with the CIA that has a pool of agents. They're probably working with them. I wouldn't be surprised if they don't have people around that rubble that are listening to see what's going on. Obviously, they're listening to electronic traffic to find out what they can find out about Saddam. And I think they're also still going out and looking for targets of opportunity, as well as like we said, try to build up a rapport with some of the locals to gather more information.
Stand by if you would. Let me turn to Colonel John Garrett. You're a former Marine, sir, and you must be heartened by the fact that we're now reading reports of hundreds of Iraqis who are greeting U.S. Marines as they move from the east toward the center of Baghdad. And let me read to you one of the most recent bulletins that just came out from Reuters. I'll read it directly. Iraqis asked on Wednesday who was running their country after U.S. forces swept almost unchallenged through northeastern Baghdad, talking about the Marines, toward the heart of the capital and cheering as looters sacked shops and offices. There is no sign of police or government authority. I got to read this one quote. A woman at a hospital said, "You're a journalist. Please tell us what's going on. Where is our government? To whom do we belong now?" I don't know. What are your thoughts about what's happening right now?
Well, I think we're in a transition in many ways. What's happening right now, I think, is a classic example of what's called the three-block war. In one block or area, you have security, peacekeeping operations, and another you have humanitarian, and in another maybe full-on combat. And pretty much all three are going on at the same time. Down in Qasr and Basra, we're seeing a transition. The military governor there is a Brit named Colonel Peter Jones, and he's even as we speak interviewing, talking to Iraqis who will be the new police force, the new security force, surely during the transition to operate with the British and Americans and others who were there, but to get some of these other sort of peacekeeping enterprises under the control of the Iraqis and to get things smoothed out a bit.
And Colonel, one of the keys here, this woman who was at the hospital saying we don't know who's in control cited the fact that nothing's on radio or television anymore. We know that U.S. forces knocked out Saddam's state-run Iraqi television off the air yesterday, and that deprives the regime of a key source of influence, doesn't it?
Well, yes, it does. And, you know, the first concern of ours, of course, has to be on securing the military objectives, force protection, securing the area. Then we transition into the other things regarding the extended ways that we provide information. I think what's most important to the Iraqis now, however, is what they're seeing our people do, how they act, and we see this trust beginning to form, and we see them welcoming us, which is really a great turn.
Yeah, well, the next step, I suppose, is to kill or capture Baghdad Bob, as he's known, the information minister Mohammed Saeed al-Sahaf, because his comments continue to inflame Arab sentiment outside of Iraq, which gets its view largely from Al Jazeera, as well as Abu Dhabi and some other Arab-oriented but anti-coalition television and news sources. So maybe in the next 24 hours, Baghdad Bob is going to be dead or in American hands. I want to say thanks to Brad Baker and Colonel John Garrett. Thanks very much, Rita.
And speaking of Baghdad, Bob, he usually does his appearance, as we know, every day, usually around 5 to 6 a.m. Eastern time. So we'll see if he makes another appearance. He did that sort of strange appearance yesterday, which was bizarre, saying, oh, no, why would we surrender? Maybe you should surrender, just sort of, you know, coming from another world. But we'll see if he makes another sort of surprise appearance in the next hour or so, and we'll, of course, keep you posted on that. Meantime, to talk more about the looting and the situation within Iraq, Steve Harrigan is standing live near the border of Iraq in Rowayshah, Jordan. What are you hearing about, Steve? It's incredible, and if we can show these pictures sort of a little bit as you talk about them, that we just got in, just dramatic looting, and then on the other hand, also seeing a lot of civilians cheering, throwing flowers to the troops. It's really an incredible sight.
Some dramatic pictures just coming in. It really seems to be a fluid situation over the past couple of hours. First, just one bit of news here on the border between Jordan and Iraq. Iraq has closed that border, so it's shut down access and egress from Iraq into Jordan. That's one sign that the regime is certainly in deep trouble. As far as the looting goes, it seems to have broken out in at least a couple of places in Baghdad. It's not clear how widespread this is or whether we are just seeing slices of what's going on in the city, but certainly some dramatic pictures. One site is around the UN compound, that Canal Hotel where they were based up. And of course, they had more than 100 vehicles there, those white UN Jeeps. Most of those have been stolen now, so they are raiding not only, they're stealing vehicles from the UN as well as office equipment and computers. Another region which has been hit hard is around the National Olympic Committee run by one of Saddam Hussein's sons. There's a lot of sports stores around there, and those have been looted too. And you just see pictures over and over again, mainly of young men, some enterprising enough to have trucks to haul their load, but people carrying office chairs over their head, computers, refrigerators. Some people don't seem to have much of a choice. They're grabbing whatever they can. We saw one man, pictures of one man with a vase of flowers, another man with just one old tire from a truck. So certainly a real scale of value in the different items being looted. There are also reports of cheering going on, the long waited for and long sought by the U.S. pictures of U.S. forces being cheered. We haven't seen the video of this yet to confirm it, but there are numerous eyewitness reports of U.S. Marines in eastern and in central Baghdad being cheered, having flowers thrown on them. Some of the video just remarkable. Out in front of one of Saddam Hussein's palaces, there was an old man with a large portrait of Saddam Hussein. He was beating that portrait with his sandal, saying, "This is the day we've been waiting for." Of course, the mood here seems to be one of jubilation at this point, but you know, when you have crowds, those moods can change easily. Right now it's midday in Baghdad, but certainly a chaotic situation as a lot of men, young men with guns, are out on the street grabbing what they can. Rita, Greg, back to you.
And Steve, you know, as you point out the jubilation, it does have to be tempered. And we're hearing a lot of reports of a number of U.S. military spokespeople, including we heard from Captain Frank Thorpe, who's there at CENTCOM with our David Lee Miller, saying we do have to be careful because some fierce fighting could still be ahead. You know, we've gotten into some nuggets of Baghdad, but there's still a lot of untapped areas.
You're absolutely right, Rita. I think it would be, you could read too much into these pictures of looting. You could see them as, well, authority has completely melted away, you know, it's over. And that's certainly not the case. There are still reports about sporadic gunfire, sporadic battles inside Baghdad, so some fighting still going on. And certainly a very fluid situation which could turn ugly as jubilation turns to anger over what people have endured for so long, and perhaps people taking vengeance on some of their foes as well. So a chaotic situation. We are just seeing slices of it, but those slices certainly point to the fact that at least in large parts of the Iraqi capital, civil authority has melted away. Rita?
And I want to explain to our viewers, this is some new video that we're looking at, Steve. Pretty incredible stuff. This is a poster of Saddam Hussein, and they are punching it and kicking it. So just showing the anger towards this regime. An interesting quote, too, Steve, I want to read you. This is from the Major General. This is the commander of the 1st Marine Division. It's in the Washington Post tomorrow, and it's kind of a colorful quote. It asks about, is Saddam alive or dead? And he says, I don't want to say that Saddam is irrelevant, but when you take over his country and drink his liquor, it doesn't much matter. And on one hand, making light of the fact that, you know, here, you know, we've stepped in his palaces, as we've seen from our own Greg Kelly. But it is critical, I think, and in public opinion, certainly here in the United States, whether Saddam Hussein is alive or dead and whether he's out of power.
You're right, especially in a regime like this that has been in power for so long, despite being in a number of wars. I think timing here is so important. So many people were wondering and questioning, you know, why aren't the U.S. forces, the coalition forces, being welcomed? Why aren't they being cheered? It's not happening. Certainly, it might be happening right now, and it might be important to understand something about Iraq, why it might be happening late. These are people who've seen, you know, cruise missiles come into their city, but yet Saddam Hussein remaining in power. It may be only these patrols that we've seen in the last couple of days, these probing efforts by U.S. forces that have really finally convinced Iraqis who are deprived of mass media, who can't own satellite dishes. It's finally convinced them, they've seen with their own eyes that things have changed, and maybe now decades of caution are finally being shed in what seems to be some real jubilation, hadn't been seen in a long time, actual, sincere jubilation on the streets of Baghdad. Rita?
Steve, Greg Jarrett, real quickly, the Iraqi government's public relations campaign seems to be crumbling right now. State-run television has gone off the air, and, you know, the information minister handlers who always tried to influence reporters, according to BBC reporters, say has suddenly and magically disappeared, nowhere to be found. And normally, you know, tape of Saddam Hussein is picked up by Al Jazeera and other, you know, Arab media. What are you seeing there in Jordan? Any sign of any videotape of Saddam Hussein or even the information minister in the last few hours?
No, we haven't seen it. We've just seen some archive footage of Saddam Hussein. I think it's really important to understand just how critical this information minister has been. He's lampooned in the West as a fool and saying ridiculous things, but he still has had a real impact in this region. He's been able to refute Western reports, and with the level of media access for most Iraqis, this guy has been, to some degree, an effective spokesman and a sign that resistance still exists. So while he may seem to be a real, knucklehead in the U.S., over here he's still been at least a voice, at least something for Iraqis to continue to fear, and now apparently he is gone. Back to you.
All right. I think they're using even other words, a knucklehead. All right, Steve, thank you very much.
That's a pretty good term.
That's a very good term. Thank you.
Right. It's the top of the hour. Good morning, everybody. About 1 o'clock in the afternoon in Baghdad, 5 a.m. In the morning here in New York. I'm Greg Jarrett.
And I'm Rita Cosby, and this is Fox News continuing coverage of Operation Iraqi Freedom. U.S.
forces continue to move towards central Baghdad, widening their control of the Iraqi capital, and they are being greeted, according to press reports from central Baghdad, by hundreds upon hundreds of cheering Iraqis, and there is also some widespread looting. For the latest, let's head to the Pentagon. Kelly Wright is standing by. Hi, Kelly.
Hi, Greg. Defense officials here at the Pentagon had said all along that once the regime would begin to fall, that the Iraqi people would then begin to show their emotions, their true emotions, and actually greet the coalition forces once they moved in and actually show them that Saddam had been taken out. And that is the big question of the day. Is Saddam Hussein dead or alive? President Bush, the commander-in-chief, was asked that question, and he replied that he doesn't know if Saddam is alive, but he does know this: Saddam is losing control of his people, and he is also losing a grip on his regime. Having said that, somewhere in the rubble of this massive 60-foot crater, defense officials believe suspected leaders of the Iraqi regime might be buried there. That after a B-1 bomber dropped 4 2,000-pound precision bombs on the site. The strike called in after credible intelligence indicated Saddam, his 2 sons, and members of the Iraqi regime were there.
We had asked, can we hit our original targets as well? And we were told, negative, we need you to go direct towards this target. Guys, this might be the big one.
2 British newspapers, however, are reporting that Saddam Hussein and his sons Uday and Qusay survived the blast Monday afternoon. British intelligence sources reportedly say Saddam had been in the building earlier but left minutes before the bombs hit. Meantime, defense officials at the Pentagon say it's too early to determine if Saddam escaped the blast. As coalition ground forces move through the heart of Baghdad, the area has become increasingly dangerous for everyone, including journalists. At the Palestine Hotel, 2 TV cameramen from the Ukraine and Spain were killed and 3 others wounded. CENTCOM says U.S. troops observed snipers firing from the hotel when they gave return fire. A Jordanian journalist working for Al Jazeera and who once worked for Fox News was killed when the network's Baghdad office was hit during an airstrike.
War zone is a dangerous place. Baghdad in particular, we believe, would be a dangerous place. We continue to warn people, we continue to warn news organizations about the dangers. We've had conversations over the last couple of days. News organizations eager to get their people unilaterally into Baghdad. And we are saying it is not a safe place. You should not be there.
Allied forces have supremacy in the skies above all of Iraq now. They are shifting their bombing campaign to northern cities. The Air Force says that coalition aircraft conducted a bombing campaign in Mosul, Kirkuk, and Saddam's hometown of Tikrit. They're trying to degrade Iraqi defenses before coalition ground forces move in. So while we're seeing a lot of looting and jubilation on the ground, again, the report from the Pentagon is that Baghdad is still a very dangerous place simply because of how fluid everything is there on the ground. Of course, we've heard from our embed reports talking particularly about Rick Leventhal as they're moving out, the Marines moving out to actually find out where snipers are located. And there's also a report from the defense officials here at the Pentagon that the Marines have taken over the Rashid airport, and as a result of that, they went into a prison near that airport and found 2 uniforms of American POWs, those uniforms giving an ominous threat or an ominous sign because they were bloodied, and they are still looking for 7 American POWs. Back to you.
Kelly Wright, live at the Pentagon with a nice summary of the stunning events that have taken place over the last few hours. Thanks very much, Kelly. Rita?
All right, and joining us now to talk about what Kelly was talking about, we have Bill Cowan, who's a retired Marine Lieutenant Colonel and also a special ops expert, and also Van Hipp, a former Deputy Assistant Secretary of the Army, also a South Carolina guy, so I like that. And also let's bring in also Colonel Dick Esau, who's a former Marine who's with us here in studio. Colonel Esau, I want to ask you just real briefly, the sense about Rashid military prison. I think this is so troubling to hear this word that there may be traces of blood, U.S. military uniforms. It's not boding well, unfortunately, for our POWs.
No, but the fact is that they've obviously moved them, so the chances are pretty good that they're still alive. The question is, where did they move them to? And the special operations people we have looking for them are, as I said the other day, the best in the world. And I think that hopefully they will find them and they will release them.
Van Hipp, the focus really is right now on getting these special ops in there, getting to these POWs. I mean, this is absolutely critical. And fortunately, we had some good news with these two special ops guys, the ones who were critical that were rescued by some of the Army folks. So there's some good hope there. But it is really difficult. Walk us through sort of the steps on trying to get these POWs.
It really is tough, and some of the evidence that you're seeing coming out of this read just kind of underscores the kind of subhuman species that we're dealing with Saddam Hussein and his henchmen. So it's a terrible situation, but if anybody can do it, our special ops guys can do it. And I've got great confidence, and it was a great story to see the two that have already been rescued.
Yeah, that was a great story. Colonel Cowan, give us a sense of what the special ops guys are doing now in terms of trying to root out, trying to follow the trail of where the POWs may be.
It's all about intelligence, Rita. You know, PFC Jessica Lynch, who was rescued because we had an Iraqi doctor walk 5 miles to our lines to tell us that she was there. And then they sent him back to get more intelligence. He came back out again one more time. My understanding is he came out with drawings of the hospital, which is very critical for the planners to put their operation together. When he came back out the second time, they really had a high level of confidence that indeed this guy was telling the truth. And I imagine while he was walking, we were getting as much intel as we could from imagery, trying to really get a good layout of the thing. So we had good intelligence and a good plan when we went in to get her. And with respect to these other POWs we're looking for, the whole thing centers around intelligence. Our special ops guys, we've got to assume that those POWs are being held around a number of military guys, so we're not going to be able to get in real close to them. We're probably doing everything we can to pick up any kind of communications that's out on the airwaves there about these guys, trying to locate where they are. If we can get some idea where they are, then we'll put some special ops teams in and around to try to do some reconnaissance and surveillance, try to pick out any indicators we can of wherever they're being held, how it's managed, how it's maintained, what security looks like, and try to put some kind of a plan together to go out and rescue these folks.
And Colonel Cowan, you talked about the Iraqi. That was an amazing story. That was the attorney who was married to the nurse who walked, 24 miles to help U.S. Marines and help, obviously, Jessica Lynch. That was incredible. Are we also trying to focus on getting some of these generals and getting some of the sort of Iraqi leadership folks who may have a good sense to either get them into custody, get them to crack?
We are, Rita, no question about it. I think we're getting some nice late-breaking news here about things happening on the on the east side of the river. American forces being welcomed into Saddam City, but we need to really remember that the east side of the river has not been our biggest worry. Our worry has been the west side of the river, where incidentally the crater is that we've not been able to get to yet. It's the west side of the river where the Sunni and the Ba'ath Party loyalists really are. So that's where the real issue is, and we don't want to get too far ahead of ourselves and thinking that things are about to be over. We've got no reports of popular uprisings on the west side of that city. The west side of the city, as we can see from the maps, is very big. We're not really in there. We might have some special ops guys in there, but we're not in there in force. We may have a long way to go, and we should assume that those POWs are over on that side now being held by Iraqi forces.
I want to go around the horn and figure out the opinions from each of you about how this ends, because it could end in a matter of days. We know that Secretary of State Colin Powell, who knows a thing or two about war, said that the hostilities are near an end. We've heard the president say it could be over in days. That was echoed at CENTCOM in our interview with David Lee Miller a short time ago. We know that U.S. Army and Marines are converging from east and west toward the center. getting really very little resistance from the remaining bands of Iraqi fighters. We don't know where Saddam is, but, you know, we haven't seen him emerge in the last 24 hours since we tried to take him out with 8,000 pounds of bombs. So, Van Hipp, let me begin with you. How does this end? Does some general come forward or group of generals come forward and say, that's it, we surrender, it's over, Saddam's gone, or does it just sort of peter out, everybody disappears?
Obviously, we're trying to do that now with the communication between General Franks and some of these remnants of the Iraqi leadership. But here's what I think you're going to see happen and what we are seeing right now. As far as Mosul and Kirkuk is concerned, it seems to me that because we did not have that real strong northern front with heavy firepower, i.e. because our friends the Turks didn't do us any favors and we weren't able to get the fourth ID in there when we needed them to be, what we've done is not unlike Basra, in that we're hoping that Mosul and Kirkuk fall from within, and we're on the outskirts of both Mosul and Kirkuk. I think you will continue to see that occur, and hopefully the Iraqi military in Mosul and Kirkuk realize that once Baghdad has completely fallen, the game is over. I do think, though, that the end game is Tikrit. I really do, because that is Saddam's birthplace, and as I said earlier, it's his hometown, and it is the birthplace of the Ba'ath Party.
Colonel Esau, if I understand your earlier comments, you would agree with that. Tikrit is the key here because it's the hometown of Saddam Hussein. It has his hardcore loyalists there. That could be the last stand.
Yeah, and listening to what everybody's been saying this evening, if Saddam Hussein is dead, okay, this war could be over in a couple of days. If he did escape, the chances are pretty good he would go home. You know, think about yourself. Where would you go when you were really hurting?
Yeah.
He would go home.
Or he might go to Syria.
Well, I don't think he'll make it to Syria. I think first he'd go home. And, you know, if we hit him up there, I honestly and truthfully believe that that would be the end of the war.
Colonel Cowan, how does it end?
Well, I agree with Colonel Esau and with Van Hipp. I think it may end up there in Tikrit. We may still see some heavy fighting in some pockets in and around the western side of Baghdad while we root some people out. But eventually we're going to have to make that ground movement up to Tikrit, and hopefully these guys are going to surrender up there, having watched what's happened in the rest of the city. But no question, there's going to be some hardliners in there. We've seen the hardliners already with these guys in these little white trucks, these technicals making these suicide drives against our armored columns. There's probably a fair number of those guys still out there who don't want to give up no matter what, because they know giving up means in some form or fashion they may get turned over to the Iraqi people and suffer a fate worse than just driving a little white truck at an armored vehicle and trying to shoot it out.
All right. Well, all of you stand by. We're going to go to a quick break right now. And as we go, you talk about these armored trucks. Fortunately, we're seeing some unarmored trucks and obviously some cheering Iraqis to U.S. forces. We're going to leave you now, if we can, with the break of that video, if we can. I'm putting everybody on the fly here. Some amazing pictures that just came in. Looting in Baghdad, also cheering in the streets of Baghdad. Happy to see the U.S. Marines coming in. And we will bring you those pictures when we come back. Some amazing shots showing freedom on the streets of Baghdad. And here they are. You can see a little bit of looting. You can also see some happy faces that U.S. forces are there. And we'll bring you more of these pictures when we come back. Also, a live report from CENTCOM. Stand by. We'll be right back.
Decades now and repressed these populations. You know, it's a small inner circle of Saddam's friends and cronies that have profited from the oil revenues of the country and so on. And this is essentially what the planners of this military operation expected to happen, or had hoped would happen earlier on in this process. So now that it is happening, even with some sporadic fighting still taking place throughout the city, they expect that this will prompt more and more people to come out in the city. It's what the Pentagon refers to as the tipping point.
Yeah,
that
and
is
Chris,
yes.
I just want to interrupt you for a second, because these pictures are such a contrast to what Walter Rogers was reporting earlier in other parts of Baghdad, because I want everyone to keep in mind this is a very large city. There is an eerie calm there, and there are no signs of paramilitaries, of the Fedayeen, and literally, didn't the U.S. military think there were tens of thousands of these kinds of troops within Baghdad? And if so, where did they go?
Well, the concern is that there still are at least thousands of these, particularly Fedayeen and some of the Special Republican Guard people, soldiers inside of Baghdad. But when, again, it's, I was just referring to the tipping point, when it reaches the stage, when a conflict like this reaches the stage where it becomes clear that the leadership is no longer in control, then those that have been loyal to the leadership, that have been fighting to the last drop of blood, as it were, to defend the regime, once they see that the regime may be gone, if the information minister stopped showing up for work today, this is the man who was saying that the coalition would find their graves here, that they would be destroyed. If that has all come to an end, then today may be the final day, from what we're seeing here, of any significant resistance. Now, organized resistance really melted away in the last couple of days, and it's been sporadic, guerrilla, irregular warfare, picking at U.S. forces, sniping, and that sort of thing.
Well, on that note, Chris, will the mission of the coalition troops within Baghdad change?
Well, they still have to maintain a tight defensive posture and wait and see, quite honestly, whether these Fedayeen forces try to regroup. In conversations I've just had in the last couple of hours, I've been told that over the last 24 hours, there have still been some instances where Special Republican Guard units, along with Fedayeen and some other irregular forces, have been rallying up in mosques and in schools, gathering up in groups of 100 to 200 and confronting the U.S. forces head on. They have not fared very well. I'm told that hundreds and hundreds of these troops, Iraqi troops, have been killed. Very lopsided confrontations, 15 or 20 vehicles rushing a U.S. armored convoy and being destroyed in a matter of 2 to 3 minutes, I'm told, in each and every instance. So clearly the scale is being tipped to the other side here, and as it becomes more and more clear that the coalition is there to stay and that Saddam Hussein's regime is gone, I think you're going to see these parties that feel that they have been repressed by the regime coming up and taking it out on the regime. One of the things that the coalition is concerned about is that they don't want to see a frenzy of killing of Saddam loyalists in the cities, for just the maintenance of order, if nothing else. But it seems likely that there will be at least some of that taking place. When when oppressors are toppled, the oppressed tend to rise up and exact vengeance. So now that you see celebrating in the streets, it's just another major, and this is a major and very significant sign that the regime is losing or has lost control of the city of Baghdad, at least. Certainly areas in the south, and U.S. and coalition forces continue to pound the remaining organized Iraqi forces in the north as well. So this may be a defining moment, pardon me, a defining day, certainly, in the course of this conflict.
Certainly so. Chris Plant, we're going to let you get back to work so you can gather more information for us. Thank you for the insight. As we continue to look at these extraordinary pictures, let's throw it back to Kuwait City and Bill.
All right, look, Carol, listening to you and Chris Plant talk about that, it reminds us awful lot of what happened yesterday in Basra with the looting that we saw, the British military witnessing that. We are under the understanding, though, that that was about a 24-hour period in which that looting was conducted in Basra, largely a Shia population as well in Basra in the southeast. Since that time, though, there has been some order restored in Basra, and today we're told that it remains much more quiet than it has been over the past 2 days. Back in Baghdad, though, clearly that is the story of the day at this point. I want to get down to Tom and Tier at Central Command in Qatar with the U.S. military. I'm certain, no doubt, Tom, they're watching these images and seeing what they are underway right now in Baghdad. I'm not sure if it brings a smile to their face. I don't know if it says, so, see, we told you so, but at this point, reaction is what?
Bill, I think over the last 20 days they have been waiting to see the signs of what would be perceived by some as victory. They always say the end of the regime, the end of the control of Saddam Hussein over the population would be seen as victory, if indeed there is a victory here. Joining me now, Captain Frank Thorpe, Public Affairs Officer for CENTCOM. You can't see the pictures we're getting in right now, new pictures from Baghdad, but there's jubilation in the streets. There are people going out and picking up refrigerators and carrying them on their back. Anything that's not tied down in an office that was controlled by the regime is being picked up. The same signs, pictures that we saw in Basra are now being repeated in Baghdad. What does this mean?
I think this needs to be taken in a broad context as to what is happening with the regime. In Basra, we saw this happen. The British have transitioned to more of a security and stabilization force there in Basra. And this is a one-step-at-a-time pace that we have to be on. I think what some of these pictures that we're seeing this morning indicate is that the Iraqi people are no longer living under that tight grip of fear and torture and humiliation that the regime has exerted upon them for 2 or 3 decades. So time will tell as we move forward here. Again, the ultimate goal, as you very well said, is the end of the regime. And if that's what we're starting to see here, again,
are these pictures an indication of that?
It could be that these pictures are indicating that the end of the regime is on its way. As we've been saying, it's a very deliberate pace we're on. It's not over. Tom, I would hazard that there may very well be some fierce days of fighting ahead. There's still some of the country, cities to the north that we have not gotten into. So we need to be very settled in our pace as we look at this and ensure that we look at the ultimate goal, the overall goal, and not to be too hasty in our conclusions here.
What challenges do you face in the days ahead? You have a city that's obviously erupting right now. There is no control per se. The police are not on the streets. People are driving the wrong way on one-way streets, not obeying traffic lights. You're increasing the size of the military force in the ground. What's going to be their role in the coming hours in Baghdad with the current situation?
Well, I think what you're going to see is what you've seen overnight is a continuing expansion of the areas that we're operating in, continuing to keep those forces supplied, continuing to defeat Iraqi resistance. We're still seeing some resistance.
So this is still a military operation?
This is very clearly still a military operation. Reports overnight of sporadic but fierce firefights. And when I say that, I mean brief firefights lasting perhaps minutes, small numbers of vehicles, not an organized operation, but fierce fighting. And for those young soldiers and Marines who are on the ground and they're having weapons fired at them, we can only describe that as fierce as they continue to pursue this. So as far as we're concerned, there's still a military operation going on. There's still many military objectives. And step by step, we need to look at this with that overall objective of the end of the regime.
But clearly there has been some trigger, whether it's the police pulling out, whether it's the minders not showing up for the journalists, the Minister of Information not holding his briefing, the clear lack of control by the regime on the city of Baghdad.
I think that there's probably many different triggers that are happening. We are operating right there in the heart of the city. The Iraqi people are seeing that what the coalition was saying for the last days, weeks, months, that we were committed to their liberation, we were committed to ridding the regime of weapons of mass destruction, that we're true to our word, and that commitment is being fulfilled. And they're seeing it firsthand, as they've seen it in Basra and Najaf and An-Nasiriyah, and now they're seeing it in Baghdad firsthand. That's perhaps one of the biggest triggers, is that they're seeing our forces there, and we're seeing that tight grip of the regime loosening up, but loosening up only in certain areas of the country, so still a long way to go.
Where do these forces, these fighters that existed 24 hours ago in Baghdad, where have they gone?
Well, there's still a lot of them there. We have not seen the end of the Iraqi resistance in the city. A lot of them, quite frankly, have been defeated. We have several reports overnight, both from the 1st Marine Expeditionary Force operating in the east of Baghdad and the 5th Corps operating there in the heart of the city, of vehicles, military vehicles, confronting our forces, trying to take them under attack, being defeated, very firmly defeated. But there's still forces operating in there. Several times I hear the term used, melting away or something like that. Now, I have to be really clear. There's still fighting forces committed to the regime. Some of these forces, the Special Republican Guard, they're committed to this regime. And they know that when the end of the regime comes, their influence is over. So they're still fighting for that power and influence that they think they may be able to maintain. The fact of the matter is they won't be able to.
What about Tikrit? We don't hear much about what's going on in Tikrit. It's still an ongoing operation up there?
Tikrit is an ongoing operation. We have blocked the roads between Baghdad and Tikrit to ensure that regime leadership cannot escape to that city, as well as we have used our air dominance over the country to conduct airstrikes on leadership facilities there in the city, as well as military forces that continue to be in and around that city.
All right, while we're seeing the pictures of celebrations in downtown Baghdad, there is definitely here at CENTCOM an air of cautious optimism, very cautious optimism, saying that while there is celebration on the streets and you see people rejoicing that all of Iraq and even parts of the city of Baghdad may not be showing the same images that you're seeing now in the center of the city, that there are still operations going on, there are still hostilities going on, that the word that apparently is spreading in downtown Baghdad has not gotten to the rest of the country yet. Bill?
Tom, thanks. Tom Mentir at CENTCOM. We'll get a briefing in 90 minutes down there in Qatar at Central Command when they conduct their daily briefing. A few other things we're picking up watching the wires based on the reports we're getting of not just cheering but also the looting as well. Some reporters in Baghdad indicate that military sites are favorite targets. Government buildings are targets as well, with Iraqis taking computers and bookshelves, tables. Some reports of Iraqi jeeps being taken as well. There's a UN headquarters also in the city, and there were earlier reports that indicated that some of the UN vehicles are being driven away as well. They are well marked. They are white. They have UN stickers on them. Good chance you're not going to get very far driving that thing without somebody stopping and noticing. Nonetheless, these are the images in parts of Baghdad today, where I understand is the eastern part of the city, near Saddam City, and again, as we have pointed out, mostly Shia. Of the country's population, more than 60% is Shia, the rest being Kurds and Sunnis. Carol, we'll watch it from here. Extraordinary images already today in Baghdad. Back to you now.
Oh, certainly so. And you heard Tom Mentir says he's not sure if word of what's happening in Baghdad has spread to the rest of Iraq. Well, let's see if it has. Let's go to northern Iraq right now, where Brent Sadler has been during this war. Brent, has news of what's happening in Baghdad traveled to you?
Well, Carol, you couldn't get a sharper contrast between those incredibly active scenes in Baghdad of looting, of cheering, the apparent demise of Saddam Hussein. I can tell you, having spent many, many years in Iraq myself in Baghdad, you know, you have the whole section of the population there deprived after 12 years of sanctions. And many folks there had to sell their belongings just to sustain life there. So the opportunity of being able to break into regime offices and walk off with refrigerators and household goods and this kind of thing, you know, it's hardly surprising. You know, the fact that they've been ruled the way they have under that tyranny for 30 years, there's going to be a period of free fall, if you like, where people are just not going to be able to understand how life will kick off again, given the fact that all those instruments of tyranny are slowly being torn away. You know, tearing down a picture carried a death sentence. I was just holding a torn picture of Saddam myself in this location I'm reporting to you from. I mean, the fact that you're holding shreds of Saddam Hussein in very many parts of Iraq now is an incredible feeling just in itself. If you come back to where I am now, look at the contrast here. I'm now speaking to you from an area of the southeastern part of the northern front, which has just come under the control of Peshmerga. And if we swing the camera around, you'll see here Peshmerga having just taken this command bunker